Hello. In the last lecture, we have studied what is the F statistic. So F statistic is a test statistic when you need to test a hypothesis about multiple coefficients at the same time. So then, like the T statistic, we have to construct an F statistic, which can be interpreted as the standardized distance between the hypothesis and the estimate. So, and as a result, the F statistic is approximately a chi-square distribution with the degrees of freedom equal to the number of coefficients involved in the hypothesis. Or that is the first approach we can understand the F statistic. And there is another approach based on the restricted model and the unrestricted model. So unrestricted model is literally nothing happens in the regression model, but restricted model is the regression model that to which the hypothesis is assumed. So if the hypothesis is true, then you don't need to estimate a few coefficients. So that regression model is the restricted regression model. And we learned how we implement the F statistic and how we interpret the results and how to reject the hypothesis in the previous lecture. Today we are going to discuss some minor issues about the F statistic. The first thing I need to mention is the F distribution. Earlier, I said that the F statistic is approximately a chi-square distribution, which is true, but in some textbooks when I was a student, like most textbooks say that the F statistic follows an F distribution. So it is not wrong either. So then, but the difference here is to say that the F statistic follows an F distribution, you need these two assumptions, which is quite strong. So first, the error term has to be homoscedastic, which means the variance does not depend on X, and also the error term must be normally distributed. These two are very strong assumptions. On the other hand, chi-square distribution does not require these assumptions. Chi-square distribution only requires a large sample size. So as long as you have large sample size, then chi-square is enough. So the large sample size is not that large. So usually like 35, or some textbooks say more than 30, or others say 35 or 50. But I would say safely, you may, if you have more than 100 observations, then you may approximate the distribution to a chi-square distribution. So in that sense, and these days the consensus is that chi-square distribution approach is much better, more plausible, and still the approximation error is pretty small and much easier to calculate. And in the end, so also you can say that as the sample size goes to the infinity, as the sample size increases, the F distribution converges to the chi-square distribution. So because of this, when the sample size is large enough, there is little difference between F distribution and chi-square distribution. So that also means you do not need to know what is the F distribution. But still, however, Stata and many programs like Excel, Stata, and many programs computes the p-values using the F distribution. I think chi-square distribution is better, but F distribution is not much different. So we don't need to worry too much about this. And I'm just talking about this topic. So conclusion is that you don't need to know what is the F distribution in this course, but still it is used in some textbooks and in some programs. But you may just think it as a kind of chi-square distribution. So there is no problem even if you don't know what is the F distribution. So, and some textbooks has this kind of table. So this is F distribution table. So depending on the degrees of freedom, the threshold for 10%, 5%, 1% significance level changes, but it's not. I think it's useless. So you do not need to know this. And it's an interesting history. So if you have time, you may read the history. So what it says here is, so these days I think I'm telling you as if the F distribution is an outdated and something that has to be obsolete. I kind of agree. That is not, I agree with that. But however, in the early 20th century, like 100 years ago, F statistic was a very surprising, amazing theory, and like it was a breakthrough we statisticians had. So at that time, so F distribution was a very nice finding, and so it was widely spread, and many textbooks and many statistics theory was developed based on this theory. So you cannot simply do not disrespect the distribution. It is not wrong. But like later, recently, we know that computations developed much more than before, and also statistics theory is developed faster. So we realize that F distribution can be replaced by a better, maybe a better distribution called the chi-square distribution. So that is the kind of history. And still F distribution is mentioned in many research papers, textbooks, and programs. So you just need to understand it is nothing special. That's all. That's what I wanted to say. And summary, read the summary. So what you need to say to argue that you have a chi-square distribution, you need to have a large sample size. And the textbook says more than 100. It is not restrictive at all. So these days, having 100 observations is nothing. It's pretty much like maybe less than the bare minimum these days. For publishable research, you need a much larger data set. And it's a summary. So a summary of the whole thing we studied so far. So we started from single hypothesis and extending that to joint hypothesis. So we may think about one at a time approach, but that has some distortion in the error probability. And so we developed the F statistic, and Stata has a command. You need to use a separate command to implement F statistic, and also you can understand F statistic using the restricted model in unrestricted model. These are some of what we learned earlier. Okay, so the next topic we are going to consider is a similar but a little different approach. So we are going to consider this is a hypothesis we are interested in. So it's unique, it's different from what we have learned before because it involves two parameters, two coefficients. So in that sense, it is a joint hypothesis. However, there is only one equality. So there is no and or. So it is just one equality, It is just right or wrong. So in that sense, it is one-dimensional. Then, is it a single hypothesis or a joint hypothesis? We will discuss how to handle this kind of problem. It will be also very interesting. Okay, See you later. Bye.